Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about something most of us have felt but rarely admit out loud. That moment when she starts ignoring you and your mind immediately goes to the darkest place possible. Did I mess up? Did something change? Did I lose her? But here's what I want you to hear today. Sometimes being ignored isn't rejection. Sometimes it's a sign she actually cares. See, people don't pull away when they're indifferent. They pull away when they're overwhelmed, when they're scared to feel too much, when the emotions are real enough that they don't know what to do with them yet. And understanding that, learning to respond with confidence instead of panic, that's where everything changes. Distance often signals emotional overwhelm, not disinterest. When someone suddenly becomes quieter, slower to respond, or less expressive than before, it's easy to jump to the conclusion that they've stopped caring. Our minds are wired to assume loss before understanding nuance. But human behavior, especially in relationships, is rarely that simple. Often, that distance doesn't come from a lack of emotion. It comes from the weight of too much emotion all at once. When feelings become deep, serious, or vulnerable, people handle that intensity in different ways. Some open up, some lean in, and some step back, not because the feeling is fading, but because it's becoming real in a way they haven't fully processed yet. Think about how we react to anything that matters. When we're about to make a big decision, we pause. When something scares us but also excites us, we hesitate. When we care enough about something that we don't want to mess it up, we overthink. Emotional overwhelm works the same way. Someone may pull away not to create distance, but to create space to breathe. They might be facing emotions they didn't expect, intensity they didn't plan for, or vulnerability they're not used to. And rather than risk saying the wrong thing, or committing too fast, or exposing their deeper feelings before they understand them themselves, they retreat into silence. This kind of distance can feel personal, but it often isn't. It's internal, not external. It's not about you doing anything wrong. It's about them wrestling with something inside, fear of getting hurt, fear of repeating past patterns, fear of moving too fast, or simply fear of being seen too deeply. Emotional closeness shines a light on parts of us we aren't used to revealing. When someone starts caring more than they planned, they might instinctively hit pause. Not because they want out, but because they want to understand what they're feeling before they step forward again. People who genuinely don't care tend to act consistently indifferent. They don't hesitate, they detach. They don't grow quiet, they grow unavailable. But people who care, especially those who aren't comfortable with vulnerability, often show their feelings through contradiction. They withdraw, but still pay attention. They get distant, but not disconnected. They reduce communication, yet remain emotionally present in subtle ways. This is the behavior of someone overwhelmed, not someone uninterested. Emotional overwhelm can also come from a person's past. Previous relationships may have taught them that caring leads to pain, that expressing feelings leads to rejection, or that attachment isn't safe. When new feelings emerge, old wounds echo. Instead of leaning forward, they lean back. Instead of opening up, they guard themselves. Not because the feelings are weak, but because they are strong enough to stir up old fears. Distance becomes a coping mechanism, a temporary shield to sort through confusion and vulnerability. Sometimes the overwhelm comes from life itself. Stress, work pressure, family responsibilities, or personal struggles can make emotional connection feel heavier than usual. Someone might step back not to push you away, but because they don't want to show up inconsistently. They may fear disappointing you. They may feel they can't give the connection the presence it deserves at that moment. So they pause, hoping to return with clarity rather than chaos. From the outside, distance looks like disinterest. But inside, it can be emotional overload. It's the mind trying to catch up to the heart. It's the heart trying to figure out how much it's willing to risk. and it's the person trying to balance their desire for closeness with their instinct for self-protection. This internal conflict creates mixed signals, warm one moment, distant the next. But those mixed signals often reveal that the emotions are real, not that they are absent. Understanding this difference changes the way you interpret someone's silence. Instead of panicking or chasing or assuming rejection, you begin to recognize that emotional space can be part of the connection, not the collapse of it. People don't always express intense feelings with clarity. Sometimes they express them with caution. And that caution looks like distance. But the presence of caution often means the presence of something worth protecting. People ignore what they deeply feel but can't yet express. When someone begins to feel emotions that run deeper than they expected, they don't always rise to the occasion with clarity or confidence. Sometimes the reaction is the opposite. They shut down, withdraw, or become inconsistent. This doesn't come from a lack of emotion. It comes from the struggle to manage feelings that feel too real, too heavy, or too revealing. Human beings often retreat when they're on the edge of emotional exposure because vulnerability is uncomfortable. It forces a person to confront their own fears, insecurities, and desires all at once, and not everyone has the internal tools to process that surge in the moment. When someone cares deeply but doesn't know how to articulate that care, silence can feel safer than expression. Saying the wrong thing feels risky. Opening up feels premature. And revealing true feelings feels like stepping into a territory where they no longer have control. So instead of communicating directly, they communicate indirectly through distance. This avoidance isn't apathy, it's self-preservation. They want the connection, but they also want to protect themselves from the vulnerability that connection requires. Their avoidance is a defense mechanism against the possibility of rejection, misunderstanding, or emotional consequences they're not ready to face. Ignoring someone they care about can also be a way for them to manage the intensity of their feelings. Strong emotions can be overwhelming, especially for someone who isn't used to granting themselves the permission to feel deeply. They might not be accustomed to being seen or valued in a meaningful way. They might have lived behind emotional walls for so long that letting someone in feels destabilizing. When authentic emotions surface, they can feel exposed, and exposure can feel unsafe. The instinctive response becomes withdrawal. They ignore not because they don't want to care, but because caring exposes parts of them they've kept hidden for years. People also ignore when they feel conflicted between their emotions and their logic. Their heart says one thing, their mind says another. Their feelings draw them in, but their fears pull them back. They might genuinely like the connection, but worry about what it means for the future. They may care deeply, but struggle with timing, trust, or personal readiness. This internal tug of war creates hesitation, and hesitation often looks like distance. They may believe that stepping back gives them room to evaluate their feelings, understand their fears, and figure out what they truly want. In reality, it's simply their way of navigating emotional overload. There are also moments when someone ignores because they fear misinterpretation. Expressing affection can be misread. Showing interest can be seen as too forward. Opening up can make them feel exposed to judgments. They worry about being misunderstood, appearing too eager, or revealing too much too soon. So instead of taking the risk of being emotionally transparent, they choose silence. Silence feels controlled, safer, and less likely to lead to emotional consequences they're not ready to navigate. But that silence often hides intensity, not emptiness. Another layer of this behavior comes from past emotional experiences. Someone who has been hurt before may suppress their feelings out of habit. They might fear repeating old patterns, fear losing themselves in their feelings, or fear trusting someone again. Ignoring becomes a protective strategy they've used in the past, even if it's not healthy. Their emotions might be genuine, but their ability to express them has been shaped by their history. So they hold back, hoping to avoid the disappointment or pain they once faced. It's not the absence of emotion, but the memory of emotional wounds that drives their silence. They may also ignore because they feel unprepared or inadequate. When feelings become real, they might start questioning whether they have what it takes to meet your expectations or maintain the connection. They might feel overwhelmed by their own insecurities. They fear that once their emotions are visible, they'll be expected to show up consistently, honestly, and vulnerably, things that may not come naturally to them. Ignoring becomes a way to delay emotional responsibility until they feel more capable. People sometimes mistake avoidance for disinterest because the behavior looks the same on the surface. But when someone is indifferent, the silence is empty. When someone cares, the silence is heavy. Their attention shifts, their mood changes, and their energy becomes inconsistent. You can sense something happening beneath the surface even if they don't say a word. Their distance carries tension, not apathy. It's the weight of unspoken emotion pressing against their silence, not the absence of feeling. Understanding this pattern helps you see beyond the behavior and into the truth behind it. When someone ignores you despite having shown signs of genuine connection, it's often because the emotions are too strong, not too weak. Their silence isn't a doorway closing, it's a heart trying to catch up with itself. Your response to the silence defines the relationship's direction. When someone pulls back or falls quiet, it creates a moment filled with uncertainty, but it's also a moment filled with choice. How you respond to that silence becomes just as important, sometimes even more important than the silence itself. Most people react impulsively. They take the distance personally. They panic, overthink, or assume the worst. They begin chasing, demanding answers, or trying to fill every gap with frantic energy. But what they don't realize is that this reaction can unintentionally push the other person even further away. When someone is quiet, overwhelmed, or unsure, meeting that silence with pressure only amplifies their discomfort. It doesn't bring them closer, it confirms their fears. It makes them feel boxed in, misunderstood, or rushed. Your reaction becomes the mirror in which they see the future of the connection, and if that mirror shows anxiety, insecurity, or emotional volatility, they begin to withdraw even more. A calm, grounded response sends a completely different message. It shows security. It shows emotional maturity. It gives the other person room to breathe, reflect, and figure out their own feelings without feeling suffocated. When you respond with composure rather than desperation, you communicate that their silence doesn't control you, that you are not dependent on their constant validation, that you can stand steady even when the situation feels unclear. This steadiness creates a sense of safety, something that becomes especially important when the other person is overwhelmed. People gravitate toward emotional stability. When someone is unsure, they look for cues of security. If you offer that through your behavior, you shift the dynamic in your favor. Your response also teaches the other person how to treat you. If you respond to silence with panic, you train them to believe you'll always chase. If you respond with anger or accusations, you teach them that expressing themselves, even indirectly, comes with emotional consequences. If you respond with patience and calm confidence, you show them that you expect respect, but you also respect their emotional process. You're not punishing them, nor are you rewarding avoidance. You're simply holding your ground. This balance is powerful because it communicates self-respect. And self-respect is magnetic. It shows that while you care about the connection, you are not willing to abandon your own emotional stability for it. Another reason your response matters so much is because silence is not always a message. It's often a moment of internal processing. When someone is thinking, feeling uncertain, or dealing with emotions they don't fully understand, the space they create is not about rejecting you, it's about understanding themselves. If you fill that space with chaos, they lose the room, they need to figure things out. But if you hold space calmly, Without trying to control the situation, you give them the clarity to come back on their own terms. This creates a healthier dynamic, one rooted in respect, not fear. It allows the connection to breathe rather than suffocating under anxiety. Your reaction also shapes the emotional tone of the relationship. Relationships are not built from perfect moments, they're built from how each person handles imperfection. Silence, distance, hesitation, these are inevitable. They will happen regardless of how strong the connection is. What defines the direction of the relationship is how you show up when things feel uncertain. If you respond with emotional grounding, the connection becomes more stable. If you respond with panic, the connection becomes fragile. If you respond with resentment, the connection becomes defensive. The tone you set in moments of uncertainty becomes the tone that echoes into the future of the relationship. Responding well to silence doesn't mean ignoring your own feelings. It doesn't mean pretending everything is fine or suppressing your concerns. It means expressing your emotions with clarity instead of urgency. It means asking questions calmly rather than interrogating. It means holding space for them while still holding on to yourself. You can acknowledge the silence without demanding an immediate explanation. You can express your needs without making them feel guilty. You can show that you care without abandoning your self-worth. And ultimately, your response to the silence determines whether the connection will grow or collapse under pressure. If you handle the quiet moments with strength, the other person begins to trust the relationship more. They feel safer returning after periods of uncertainty. They feel more comfortable opening up. They feel less afraid of being misunderstood. But if your reaction turns silence into conflict, they begin to associate emotional closeness with emotional instability. They start to fear that every pause will lead to confrontation. And when people feel unsafe emotionally, they retreat. Your ability to stay composed, confident, and self-respecting during moments of silence becomes the compass that guides the relationship forward. Confidence creates clarity, insecurity creates chaos. The way you show up emotionally sets the tone for how the other person feels when they're around you. Confidence isn't about pretending to be perfect or acting like nothing affects you. It's about being grounded in yourself, your worth, your boundaries, your emotional stability. When you operate from confidence, you communicate with intention instead of impulse. You express your feelings without fear, you listen without defensiveness, and you respond without needing to control the outcome. This clarity becomes a guiding force in the connection. It gives the other person a sense of direction, consistency, and emotional calm. They don't have to guess what you're thinking or wonder what version of you they'll get. Your steadiness removes ambiguity, and ambiguity is where most relationships break down. Insecurity, however, does the opposite. It turns small moments into storms. It transforms silence into rejection, unclear messages into personal attacks, and distance into disaster. When insecurity takes over, everything becomes amplified. You read too deeply into every pause, every change in tone, every delayed response. You start creating narratives in your head, stories that often have no foundation in reality. These narratives drive emotional reactions that feel real in the moment, but create unnecessary tension. This tension becomes chaos, not only inside you, but also in the relationship. The other person feels that instability. They sense the pressure, the neediness, the fear. And instead of being drawn closer, they begin to pull back. Not because they don't care, but because emotional chaos is hard to engage with. Confidence creates emotional safety. It allows the other person to relax, to be genuine, to express themselves without worrying about triggering an explosion of doubt or overreaction. When you're confident, you don't take everything personally. You don't assume the worst. You don't rush to fill silence or force clarity. You give the connection room to breathe, and breathing room is essential to growth. When someone senses that you can handle uncertainty Without losing yourself, they feel more comfortable leaning into the relationship. They know they're not responsible for your self-worth. They know they don't have to walk on eggshells. Your stability becomes something they can trust. Insecurity, by contrast, demands constant reassurance. It places emotional weight on the other person that doesn't belong to them. It makes them feel responsible for your peace, your validation, your emotional comfort. And when someone feels responsible for your internal world, they eventually feel overwhelmed. Insecurity is never satisfied. It always needs more. More confirmation, more clarity, more attention. And the more it demands, the more distance it creates. People naturally withdraw when they feel pressured to manage someone else's emotions. Not because they don't care, but because it becomes exhausting. Confidence is also attractive because it creates a sense of clarity in communication. You say what you mean, and you mean what you say. You can express interest without fear and set boundaries without hostility. You don't hide behind games, mixed signals, or emotional guessing. You show up as yourself. This authenticity makes the other person feel safe enough to do the same. It inspires honesty, respect, and openness. When both people operate from this space, the relationship flows with ease. There's no need for drama or emotional theatrics. Everything becomes simpler because both people know where they stand. Insecurity muddies communication. It makes you hold back when you need to speak up, and it makes you speak up when silence would have served better. It creates contradictions, moments where you say you're fine when you're not, moments where you overreact to things that didn't require a reaction. Insecurity keeps the relationship in a constant state of emotional unpredictability. Predictability doesn't mean boring, it means stable. And stability is what allows deeper connection to form. Without it, the relationship becomes a roller coaster, intense highs followed by confusing lows. That instability wears down trust. Confidence allows you to see things as they are, not as your fears paint them to be. It lets you interpret silence as a moment, not a message. It lets you handle disagreements without assuming the relationship is falling apart. It gives you the ability to stand on your own emotional feet, which ironically makes it easier for someone to walk beside you. When you are centered in your own worth, you don't chase, cling, or collapse. You engage with intention, not desperation. Insecurity does the opposite. It distorts reality, fuels overthinking, and turns every uncertain moment into emotional chaos. It makes you react instead of respond, assume rather than ask, and fear rather than trust. And those reactions ripple outward, shaping the entire dynamic of the connection. The chaos insecurity creates often becomes the very thing that damages what you were trying so hard to protect. Confidence doesn't guarantee that everything will go perfectly. It simply ensures that whatever happens, you're able to handle it with clarity, composure, and emotional strength.